Senator Allen represents the 24th District, which he grew up in. The 24th District covers the West Side, Hollywood, South Bay, Santa Monica Mountains, and the other communities in Los Angeles County. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Harvard University, a master's degree in Latin American Studies from the University of Cambridge, and his Juris Doctor degree from UC Berkeley. Senator Allen was first elected in 2014 and is now serving his third and final term in the state Senate. Senator Allen chairs the Senate's Environmental Quality Committee and co-chairs the Legislative Environmental Caucus. He is a member of the following Senate standing committees: Elections and Constitutional Amendments, Judiciary, Natural Resources, and Water and Transportation. He is a member of the Legislative Jewish Caucus, chairs the Legislators' Joint Committee on the Arts, and the Senate Select Committee on Aerospace and Defense. He has authored nearly 60 new laws in various areas, from environmental protection to electoral reform. Fighting the climate crisis and protecting our state's most precious natural resources have been among Senator Allen's top priorities. Cal Matters recently recognized him as one of the legislature's foremost leaders in the field of environmental protection. He authored SB 54, the Plastics Pollution Producer Responsibility Act, which was groundbreaking legislation to address plastic pollution. SB 54 establishes a producer responsibility scheme to hold the plastic industries accountable for the waste that they produce. As chair of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee, Senator Allen worked with his colleagues to pass a powerful climate change package requiring the state to become carbon neutral by 2045 and produce 90% of its electricity from clean sources by 2035, among other measures. Among his efforts to reform California campaign finance and election laws, Senator Allen authored the landmark Voters' Choice Act of 2016 to implement more flexibility in how and where to vote, creating the voting center model used in the 2020 elections. He has helped to lead the passage of the Disclose Act and Petition Disclose Act and other transparency measures that have drastically improved the disclosure of donors to political causes for the public. Thank you so much for being here tonight, Senator Allen, and we are very excited for this discussion with you and Professor O'Neill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we'll kick things off tonight by asking you what drew you into public service and running for office?
Thank you. First of all, let me thank you, Aaron, and the other Aaron who helped to make this happen. A good friend from the Senate. And I know there's lots of legislative friends I see here in the audience. And also let me give a special shout out to all the student organizations. Basically all the organizations I was part of when I was in law school. Your equivalents here are represented, and I just appreciate everyone stepping up to be part of this event. So what drew me to public service? I mean, I guess besides a deep-seated self-hatred, I guess there's a real fascination with the issues. It's very fulfilling. Being able to represent my own home community, and be able to try to solve problems for the community and the state that I love, where I grew up, is very fulfilling. It's incredibly eclectic. Mm-hmm. It's so diverse, mm-hmm. the subject matter. I mean, just give you a sense. I mean, today I was working on a land acquisition issue in the Santa Monica Mountains, meeting with a hotel group talking about tourism issues and visas and how issues relating to our tourism campaigns. I also had a meeting with students who were talking about school facilities issues, a whole other thing on oil pricing. I mean, this was just in the last couple hours today. Every day you're working on new topics, new issues. I mean, I always love school. I love going around different topics. And I will say it's a very eclectic job going into this kind of work. And there's not a lot of jobs like it. I mean, unfortunately, most lawyers end up really, when they get good, they really specialize in one particular topic. It's oftentimes a little tedious. And they get really good at it, and that's fantastic. But I really do love the fact that I'm able to work on so many different things. It's not easy. It's tiring. There's a lot of logistics involved. I represent Southern California, and now I have a kid and a wife who's got her own busy job, and we're constantly, it feels like we're always doing battle over scheduling issues and all that kind of thing, in a nice way, but it's still challenging. So it's I guess it's always been in the back of my mind as something I might want to do, but I guess I had a love-hate relationship with politics and the idea of jumping in. But I had this situation where there was an open seat for this, and I just decided to jump in. If I had more time, maybe I wouldn't have decided to do it. But it was one of these things where it was last minute, and it was an opening, and I decided I'm going to go for it, and here I am.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I've worked in the legislature myself, and I often tell students it was the most fun job I ever had because you're always learning about new things. And I think that's something about the legislative process and the policy process that really sets it apart.
Absolutely.
So your experience, background, education, how does that affect your legislative priorities? I mean, obviously your district as well.
So that's a great question. And obviously we're all shaped by the experiences that brought us here, right? What are those deep down feelings you have about things? What are the things that motivated you to run for office? What are the things that you really want to prioritize? What do you think your community needs? And certainly, I was talking to someone earlier about, I actually was meeting with some high school students today, and they were asking me about going to law school, and certainly that's a traditional path to politics. It's certainly not the only path, and there's there's a lot of value that you bring as someone with legal training to this work. But you also bring a lot of value as a doctor or as an architect. I mean, there's all sorts of professions that bring real expertise. I mean, and as do a lot of more traditional working class professions. And you bring the experience of that to your work in the legislature. Certainly, my legal training influences me all the time. I mean, you can't escape it, right? I mean, it shapes the way you think about the world. Certainly shapes the way I think about laws and legal interpretation and the kind of work that we do. I think being a lawyer actually helps to demystify the law a little bit. A lot of non-lawyers get kind of scared, of this magic book that only we have access to, and they get kind of bossed around sometimes. That's a great thing about being a lawyer. Actually, it's harder to be bossed around by other lawyers.
Sure, yes.
Because lawyers get really used to bossing people around who and BSing people, right? And so that's helpful. There are some core things that I keep falling back on, right? My dad really instilled in me a deep love for the outdoors and the environment. We went hiking every single weekend out in the Santa Monica Mountains, for example, and those experiences. I actually just lost my dad a couple of weeks ago. So it's been a kind of really rough couple of weeks, to be honest. And I've been on a couple of hikes since then, including one this last weekend with my brother. And as much as I valued the time at my dad's bedside as he was dying, it wasn't kind of high quality time, and being back out on the trail and talking to my brother, it brought back a flood of memories of this real bonding experience that I had with my dad when we would go hiking every weekend. And that love of the outdoors really influenced me. And I see how it's kind of how I'm in this environmental space now, working on environmental law, working on open space protection, on plastics, climate, all these kinds of things. So there are all sorts of things like that. I know the Jewish law students are here, right? I grew up in a Jewish tradition and had a deep sense of social justice that was instilled in me by my Jewish upbringing, and tikkun olam, healing the world, and all of those things inform my work. And then personal experiences and conversations you've had. My wife comes from a working class background, and she's really influenced me in ways that I grew up with a professor as a dad, and we weren't wealthy, but we certainly weren't impoverished. And having her perspective on my life has been really instructive, sure, as it's opened up just a whole nother world of the incredible challenges that growing up in deep poverty provides, how it impacts people right here in our society, in this wealthy society. And so and then running for office, of course, and hearing from people, having grounded experiences in my own community, serving on the school board. All these things end up influencing you in all sorts of ways. One of the weird things about being in the legislature is that you sometimes are called on to cast judgment calls, to vote on things that you never even thought about, that most people never think about. You certainly didn't think about when you were running. And they come down to these weird gut checks that, what do I really feel about this strange issue? What do I feel about, euthanasia? And these are sometimes very difficult issues. And what do I think about composting your body after you die, or card rooms and whether we should be regulating gambling there versus somewhere else. I mean, these issues I just never came to my mind when I decided to run for office, and I kind of have to both get informed as best I can, but also there's these strange gut checks, and sometimes most people are never asked to put their public opinion out there on 1,000 issues every year. And it's a disconcerting process in some respects, trying to decide how to vote on these things half the time.
Sure.
And ultimately, you try to inform yourself as best you can, but sometimes those conversations you have or weird little experiences you had in your life end up coming back and influencing the way that your policies or your policy positions are formed.
That makes sense, right? Everything shapes you ultimately who you are.
Yeah.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. So as far as the state and your own district, what do you see as kind of the biggest policy priorities facing California, and how do those align, or are they different from those in your district?
Well, at the state level, budget is a constant challenge. How do we make sure that we're, able to stay solvent and stay afloat with all the economic challenges that continue? One of the great challenges is how do we maintain a robust commitment to a progressive pro-social justice agenda while also making sure we have the revenues to help to fund that agenda?
Sure.
And how do we both, how do we strike that balance, especially when other states and the federal government have actually made it harder for California to be competitive. I mean, doing away with the state and local tax exemption, for example, at the federal level was a terrible hit to California's relative competitiveness. And we certainly know that you shouldn't spend all your resources trying to keep everybody here who complains about every tax. But the flip side is you also want to make sure revenues are strong and we continue to be a place where business likes to grow and our economy grows. Certainly drought, water issues, massive. I mean, globally, of course, climate, and yet California has a uniquely important position in the fight against climate change because of the size of our state, because of the fact that we're now the equivalent of the fourth largest economy in the world if we were a nation on our own, and the fact that we have a much greater political consensus here than exists in Washington. Certainly, housing and affordability, massive problems. We are losing people in the state of California, and the biggest portion of the population that we're losing are actually middle-class people who are really struggling to afford to live here. It's not as much. I mean, a lot of the attention goes to the big, business folks, big, billionaires. But our biggest, the most significant loss has actually been on basic affordability questions, and that interrelates to a lot of issues in my district. It's hard to afford a place. Homelessness has become a massive problem in Los Angeles. It's certainly a problem here in Sacramento too, but a huge problem, and it's become a quality of life issue on a lot of different issues, a lot of different layers. Certainly. So those are some of the big things that we're facing. Our education system continues to suffer from challenges. How do we keep a system, running? It's underfunded. It's really taken a hit during the pandemic. I mean, kids were just really suffered. I mean, I've got friends who teach in the system, and just especially those kids who are now in middle school who spent 6th and 7th grade, 5th and 6th grade, I mean, just on Zoom class. I mean, it must have been hard for everybody, but imagine what it would be like for a little kid who's still developing and doesn't have the maturity to handle it. There are going to be lots of social problems coming out of the pandemic that I think we don't even know the start of yet. So there's a lot of challenges. It's hard work, and the system's not always really built to solve these problems.
Right. Certainly complex, yes, and a huge state with all kinds of issues.
Huge state,
Yes.
so massive, so many different kinds of communities, so many industries. My district, for example, we care a lot about Hollywood, right, and TV and film production. So how do we keep production strong? Other parts of the state, it's agriculture, it's tech, and we have a lot of tech in LA too. Tourism. I mean, just yesterday, 2019, there were literally something like 127 nonstop flights a week to California from China. Now we're down to 6.
Right.
So there's been a huge hit to the tourism market in California because of the massive reduction in visits from Asia. Sure. There's just and that's had follow-on effects. So anyway, it's part of the challenge, and the fun of the job is just trying to get your head around all these issues and really see what we can do to solve them.
Absolutely. No, I mean, that's no question, right? I mean, so many things to think about every day, so many things to learn about, as you said. You serve as chair of the Environmental Quality Committee, which looks at everything ranging from air pollution, water pollution, CEQA issues, waste management. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I went from having been chair of education, and I'd come out of a school board, and actually I taught education law and policy at UCLA Law School.
Yes.
And so I'd built up a good deal of policy expertise on the topic, and also just real experience. Environment for me was something where I felt strongly about it. I'd taken environmental law in law school, but I didn't have a lot of professional experience in the area. And of course, environmental law at law school was all about NEPA and federal stuff. Now all of a sudden I'm thrown into CEQA and all the issues that we deal with at the state level. So it's been an incredible learning curve. And I've also, one of the things that is challenging about it has been kind of delving into the world of special interest groups who have very strong opinions. And when you really want to be relevant, you have to disappoint people, including some of the strong environmentalists who want you to take a purist role. But I realized pretty soon into the job that if I was totally nothing but a purist, people would work around me and undermine me, and I wouldn't actually help to shape policy. And so that's also been a challenge too. But it's a fascinating job. There's lots of science.
Yes.
Actually, I want to give a shout out to Teresa's here, in the back, who's part of our Science Fellows program. We now actually have a program where we bring in PhDs to help the legislature in those areas where there's a lot of scientific need, because we're delving into really tough issues associated with water quality and chemicals and waste management, recycling, of course, climate. So it's been a challenge for me to get my head around these issues. When I was in education, I was able to, because I'd served on the board, I actually was also on the board of regents, so I had an experience with higher education policy too. So I had a spidey sense about, well, what if we do this? What if we do that? This has been hard. Of course, now I've been doing it for several years. I'm learning the ropes. I've been reading a lot, trying to learn the science as best I can in the law. But I'm never ever. I'm always feeling as though I'm never able to rest on my laurels in this job.
Sure.
I mean, it's very challenging if you want to do it well.
So an example of some of the environmental legislation you have put forward is SB 54.
Yeah.
Got a lot of national news, single-use plastics bill, and interfaced with the initiative process as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that, some of the challenges, and what it was like to work that through the process?
Yeah, so, gosh, I came across an article once about how we used to sell all our recycling to China. And then all of a sudden the Chinese say, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. Most of this stuff is ending up in our water, our rivers and in landfills and just is litter. The quality of the recycling coming out of California continued to diminish as plastic film was getting into everything and contaminating the system. The system was increasingly broken. And the Chinese basically said no more. They put down what's called their national sword. All of a sudden, local governments who were LA used to get about $5 million a year off of its recycling. Now it was having to spend $1 million it was a net loss just to meet basic compliance rules. And it was becoming a massive problem. There's so much more plastic out in the world than there was when we were kids. And it's only getting worse and worse and worse. And so little of it is actually recycled. The only thing really, the only plastic that is reliably recycled are these water bottles. And here in California, it's about a 70% recycling rate. It should be about 95. There's really no reason why. Most states it's 30%, by the way. Most of these cups you have on your table, they're not going to be recycled. And it's just going, for one use, it's going straight to the landfill. It's there forever, basically. And oftentimes leaching into our water systems. We have microplastics everywhere in our bodies. And the plastic that actually makes it goes in the right direction, as in it gets into the waste system, it gets into the landfills, are now creating massive new costs, new liabilities. Local governments are having to shuffle just to be able to afford brand new waste management mechanisms, and they're having to turn that cost on to regular folks. I mean, County Sacramento just raised its rates by an additional $10 a month recently, just to handle all of the extra trash that they're dealing with. So it's a big problem. It's a huge environmental problem. It's actually becoming a pocketbook problem. It's a problem for local government, and it's a classic example of the way of externalities, right? The way our system works, where producers, they are incentivized to come up with the cheapest possible product and they don't have, at least until now, they didn't have any skin in the game as to the end use of their product.
Sure.
Zero. In fact, if anything, the incentives were structured for them to try to come up with the least expensive, and unfortunately, virgin plastic, has been least expensive. It's oftentimes a byproduct of the oil refining process, and so we tried for years to pass a bill to empower Cal Recycle, which is the department that oversees this area of policy, to enforce. We basically took a page out of our climate policy, which was where we gave the Air Board these goals. Hey, we want to meet certain reduction rates for greenhouse gas emissions. You figure out a system for doing it and hold industry accountable. We were going to do the same. We came achingly close a couple of years in a row to getting meaningful legislation passed. We basically had, it was the cities and the environmental community and a few good actors, but industry in general was opposed. We worked really hard to get a lot of industry groups to go into neutrality, but once we'd solved for their problem, we weren't out there trying to advocate for our bill. They just weren't fighting against it. We came so close. Anyway, we didn't pass it 2 years in a row. Eventually, a group of activists and some folks with some money said, hey, we don't think the legislature's ever going to make this happen. We're going to put a ballot measure on the ballot because we know how popular this is. They qualified a measure for the ballot, and here's what was fun. Once that happened, it started a negotiation. Our mayor, former pro tem, Darrell Steinberg here in Sacramento, passed a very consequential bill a few years back before I was in the legislature that created a mechanism where when you qualify a ballot, when a measure's heading for the ballot, if it allows a mechanism whereby if the legislature passes a meaningful and responsive legislative response to the issue that's addressed in the ballot measure proponents can pull the ballot measure back at the last minute. And so we sat down in an intense 9-month negotiation with industry, local government, waste haulers, environmental community, environmental justice voices. The list went. It was, and of course within industry, you're talking about producers and distributors and restaurants and retailers and this massive list of different industry groups that were all part of the negotiation. And we basically struck a deal that creates a system for extended producer responsibility. The idea being that the producers have the power they have the most control over their products. They know their supply chain, they know their production system, they know their market, they know their consumers. The ballot measure had a much more aggressive command and control system. They were afraid of it. They knew they could beat it, by the way, but they knew they'd have to spend $100 million attacking the hell out of it. And so what we were able to do was provide certainty. They were able, but of course we had to, the ballot measure proponents weren't going to pull the ballot measure back unless they felt as though we had something that was really strong. So that was the really fascinating negotiation. And by the way, take negotiations in law school. My favorite and most consequential class I took in law school. And it really helps me, and I think it'll help you in everything you do.
And it's in the capital learning concentration. Yes.
Yeah, I really encourage those of you that haven't to consider taking it. Because it's all about ultimately just kind of focusing on the fact that when people come at each other with 10 demands and they seem to be totally at loggerheads, what you're supposed to do as a good negotiator is to realize, well, party A really cares about items 2 and 7, and party B really cares about items 3 and 9. And as much as they may be really angry at each other or disagree about everything else, if we can figure out a way to solve 2, 3, 7, and 9, we actually can come up with a potential deal that will let everyone feel as though they've come out a winner. And that's what this whole process was about. And man, it went up. We got this thing signed by the governor at 3 p.m. We had to have it submitted to the Secretary of State by 5 p.m. that day.
I remember reading about this, yes.
And why does it last the last minute? Because it always has to go to the last minute. Because everyone always wants to exact their pound of flesh.
Yes.
But it was a very stressful, but really proud moment for me. Probably my proudest moment in the legislature was getting this globally impactful piece of legislation that I was so intimately involved with across the finish line. That now sets a standard where producers actually have to take into account the end use of their products in the design and the collection process of their products. And as a result, by the way, because we're so big, because we're such an undeniable and an unavoidable market.
Yes.
Now the biggest players in plastics around the country are having to change their business practices to comply with our law. We've already started, and they're starting to call back those scrappy entrepreneurs that have been knocking on their doors for years saying, hey, I got this really great environmentally friendly alternative to your packaging. Why don't you look at it? And they say, oh, great, that's great. We'll come call you when we're forced to.
Yes.
Well, now they're being forced to. And they got to talk to these great innovators that are producing the next generation of packaging and products. We're not telling people we're not getting rid of packaging and products. We're just saying that they have to be more environmentally friendly. We're saying that we have to, the end use, the circularity has to be taken into account.
Yes, that makes sense. No, I mean, it's groundbreaking, right? And as you mentioned, California being such a huge market, we can set trends that the producers have to follow nationwide, which is pretty darn remarkable.
This is what we did,
yes.
Just to give people an example, I come from LA with automobiles.
Yes.
When kids were growing up in South LA with half of the lung capacity of kids in rural parts of the country back in the 70s because of how terrible the air quality was in Los Angeles, you couldn't even see the Hollywood sign on a lot of days because of how bad it was. And you know, the right government, this was the kind of thing where the automobile industry wasn't going to make the change unless they were forced to. There were some good actors that were ahead of the curve, and by the way, they were the ones that were most open to regulation. But at the end of the day, unless government steps in, you're benefiting the lowest common denominator. You know, it was actually the automobile companies that were trying to do the right thing were being disadvantaged by the laissez-faire approach to government. Government said, look, we got to do better. We know you can do better. We know the technology's out there, just like we have with plastics.
Yes.
Now we have many more cars on the road. All you got to do is try to get behind the wheel in LA at 4:30 on a weekday.
Forget about it.
Gosh, so it's not like we've solved the traffic problem at all, but the air is significantly cleaner in LA. And by the way, it's significantly cleaner per car around the world. Now, we have a lot more cars.
Sure.
And you know, so that was an example of LA and California forcing a change in technology because of an environmental problem that actually led to global ramifications because it forced the entire global automobile manufacturing system that wanted to sell in California to change their technology in a more environmentally friendly way.
Sure, which is huge. Yes. And I think those kinds of long-term consequences of policymaking and being able to see those effects must be really rewarding in your field. Yes.
It's one of the really exciting things about working in California. You know, you can work in other state capitals and you can do great stuff, but when we make these kinds of changes to law, there are global ramifications, you know, in a way that most states simply can't effectuate.
Yes. No, that's absolutely true. That's why it's such a privilege to be here in Sacramento.
Yeah.
Yes. You mentioned being a member of school board and your background in education policy. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in that space?
Yeah, so I served on the board of regents, served on the school board, then served as chair, taught education law and policy, served as chair of the education committee. You know, very fulfilling, fascinating work. I really, tough work.
Yes.
Only harder now. You know, so much of the pathologies of our society play out in the education space. You realize, and unfortunately, there's some of these really depressing yokes that hang around our society's neck when it comes to education. The fact that we've never really been able to break this pernicious correlation between socioeconomic status and academic outcomes. And that continues to haunt us. And one of the kind of continual challenges is how do we keep an education system that's focused on trying to improve outcomes when you've got such massive challenges of poverty and all the challenges associated. Underfunding of our schools, underfunding of our higher education system, quite frankly, as well. I mean, right before this, I was meeting with a group of deans from the University of California, talking from different public policy schools about how we can try to improve the lot of life of the UC, which is now getting something like half, both in real dollars and as a percentage of the state budget of what they used to get back in the 80s. And the UC has played such an important role in the economic engine of the state. I mean, Silicon Valley, for example, has so much to do with UC, the biotech industry, even Hollywood. And yet, the political prerogatives are not in place to really prioritize them in the way that they ought to be prioritized. So anyway, from my perspective, we need more young people getting into elective office. We need to find more ways to create power, to empower families and parents and school districts and institutions like the universities and the community college systems to basically advocate for themselves and get more attention from the governor, from the legislature, more focus, more support.
Sure.
But it's very challenging, and I really, gosh, I mean, we've got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do, and the pandemic has only made things harder.
Definitely. You know, we'll say, as you mentioned, we'll see the consequences of that for a long time, I
Yeah.
think, and education will have to respond, not just to the issues that we currently face, but to long-term consequences of isolation and just the educational upset that was caused by the years during
Absolutely.
COVID. Yes.
Absolutely.
So turning to your role on the Elections and Constitutional Amendments Committee. I
Yeah.
think you chaired the committee, now you serve on the committee.
Yeah.
The Voters' Choice Act of 2016, tell
Oh,
us
yeah.
about that.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Well, it's another, I'm proud of that too. So we, 2014, we had record low on turnout.
Yes,
And the
we did.
pro tem at the time brought me and he said, I'm going to make you the elections chair and I want you to work on trying to, I want you to study models around the country. And let's figure out how to make it easier to vote while maintaining election integrity. We went to Colorado, and we learned about this great system there where they had these vote centers that were open for 11, 12 days before Election Day. They also had a vote-by-mail system. They had drop-off boxes. This whole idea of the fact that you could only vote in one place on one day in one location, was just so, it just didn't jive with modern day life, where, especially for working people. And why not make it easier? Why not? I mean, I totally, obviously, by the way, one of the reasons why it takes us so long for us to release the vote counts here in California, yes, it's because we've allowed people to vote up until the last minute, but we also have very rigorous checks.
Yes.
I mean, they have to check to make sure that no one's voted twice, that you're double checking the signature. There's a pretty robust checking system to ensure electoral integrity. But in the end of the day, we've created a system here in California through the Voters' Choice Act that I did that's all about trying to make it easier for people to vote, to participate. And so went to Colorado, learned about their model, and then we put it in place here. So as you know, we have the system where you've got lots of different options. You can vote anywhere in your own county, in person if you want to, in various places, or you can vote by mail. Or you can drop off your mail, your ballot at a drop box. The great thing was it actually saved the election system money because they weren't having, you didn't have to have a precinct in every neighborhood
Yes.
that, by the way, had lots of problems. Here's the other thing, there were routinely, if a precinct went down because there was some tech problem, it would be a disaster for those people because that was the only opportunity for them to vote. And if you were planning to go at 9 a.m. before work on election day, and that was your plan to go vote, and then all of a sudden, there was some volunteer didn't show up on time to open the place up. I mean, they're relying on high school kids sometimes. I mean, because they basically had to ramp up this massive operation just for election day.
Sure.
The great thing about the vote centers is that they're open for 12 days, so you get the kinks out early. You have people who know the system better, who are working at it. You don't have to hire everyone on this one day. You've got people who actually build expertise. And by the way, you've also got the backup of having the vote-by-mail ballots and drop boxes and then the provisional ballots that we have. So it's all about making it easier. We've been able to now dramatically increase turnout. People are able to participate, and we've done it with no, there's no problems in terms of all the kind of boogeyman that are out there that you hear on Fox News. We just haven't had any of those problems. And so anyway, I'm really proud of it. And it was just, but for me, it was just it was fun to take advantage of myself. I was with my wife. We went downtown to see a show, and it turned out there was a vote center across the street from the music center. Let's just go vote today. It was Sunday before the Tuesday election. We voted there. It was really easy. I didn't have to, turn my life upside down on a work day to go. It was just so easy. And I hope folks have been able to take advantage of it and participate. And please vote. Please vote if you're eligible, because it really. It's such a sacred and important part of our process.
It is.
Of our democracy.
Sure. So we've talked about a number of significant legislative accomplishments. Is there another one that you would call out as something that was meaningful to you? And then what would you say was your biggest legislative challenge that you faced?
I'm proud of, there's some smaller ones that haven't gotten as much attention, but I'm proud of. I remember, for example, when I had a bill that basically we knew we needed to there was a whole question about reauthorizing the off-highway vehicle program in the state park system. And I went to the environmental community. I said, hey, these folks were out there tearing up the desert.
Sure.
There's all these problems. But the people doing it just wanted a straight up reauthorization of the program. I got involved. I said, hey, I can get my hands dirty here. I went to the environmental community and said, look, if I can run a bill to reauthorize the program, but put in place a slew of environmental protections that are it's gonna make the program better. Either I do that, or I just vote no on the reauthorization and it passes and we don't make any progress on environmental protection. And so I introduced a bill. The writer community was really upset. They just wanted a no questions answered, no questions reauthorization. But ultimately, we got a great bill through that ended up having bipartisan support. The Sacramento Bee highlighted it. They said this is an example of the kind of painstaking bipartisanship and kind of policy work that we wish the legislature would do more often. And it was a small example of just getting involved in the unglamorous work of government and trying to do it in a way that actually ends up improving things, being willing to compromise.
Yes.
And kind of understand, see the forest for the trees. And the great thing was, as a result of that, a couple of years later, I ran another bill on PFAS. It was a chemical that's in a lot of firefighting gear.
Yes.
And we had some industry opposition to the bill, and we were really worried that, that we may have a hard time getting off the Senate floor. And we got firefighters involved. We were working with WISPA, the oil industry. They were still in opposition, but we were working with them. And gosh, I mean, I was worried about getting the vote off the floor. And then all of a sudden, a couple of Republicans say, I know this senator. I know he's going to do the work to make this right. And by the way, I also know firefighters that have died of cancer because of this exposure to this carcinogen. And so I'm going to vote for this bill. And then all of them voted for it. I mean, it went from a 21 vote thing to a 39 votes. I mean, it was just a beautiful moment for me. And I really was proud of it. And we, of course, got the bill done. And it was kind of really a nationally important moment for the fight against this carcinogen. So those little moments I'm proud of, too.
Sure.
The challenges, gosh, I mean, first of all, you got to tell yourself the serenity prayer every day in this job. Because there's some things that are above your pay grade. You're asked to cast a vote on all sorts of issues. And I will say one of my great challenges is, where do I really draw the line? Where do I put down my foot and say, I'm just not going to stand by a policy? One of the challenges I also face is oftentimes these bills come to you and you may really like 70% of the bill and hate 30%. What do you do in that case? And that's a challenge for me. Sometimes, you have to kind of look and say, hey, do I have an opportunity to make a change here? Should I hold out my vote and ask for changes on X, Y, and Z? Or do I hold my nose and vote for it? Do I want to be on the record opposing this or supporting it? Where do you decide to really, lay down the line? Sure. And that is a daily challenge in this job, and it's not always clear. It's not always easy.
No, that makes sense. I want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. So, final question would be your experience running for elected office. Any advice for students who are interested in running for office someday or working in government? With capital Lorraine concentration at McGeorge, we do get a fair few students who see themselves as elected officials someday.
Well, I really, really encourage everybody to consider spending some time in the public sector. I mean, it is fascinating. It's eclectic. It's fulfilling. It's a way to give back. You're not going to be as well compensated, as some of these big law firm jobs. But gosh, I mean, I talked to a lot of friends who I went to law school with, and almost to a T, the folks who went into the public sector are happier than the ones who went into the private sector. A lot of the public sector jobs, not the legislative jobs, but a lot of the public sector jobs actually have really decent pensions, and that's something to think about. And nobody thinks about it when you're young, but my God,
yes.
It makes a hell of a difference later on in life, and and that's not something that. By the way, if you're in the legislature, you don't get a pension, so maybe you should not run for office. So now, running for office, what are some pieces of advice? I mean, first of all, there's so many pieces of advice I could give. Try to be nice to everyone in your life, right? I mean,
Always good advice.
When you're mean to people, it comes back to bite you in all sorts of weird ways. The more friends you have, the better. And the people that like you and have a good feeling about you are just going to pop up and show up in ways that you never thought. People who I was just acquaintance with in law school, for example, maybe I had a good couple conversations with them. We'd have lunch a couple times in the dining hall, and then, but you never really stay in touch. All of a sudden, I'm getting like a $3,000 check from them when I'm announced that I'm running, just because they thought, yeah, he's a good guy. Like he's the kind of person I want to have in office, and so. So that's always really, and by the way, just having people step up and help you. When you run for office, it is a really scary thing because you're so reliant on so many other people. You're used to in your life, you're all kind of ambitious, driven people, you're at law school. You have a certain degree of control over your life. When you run for office, you're just putting yourself out there to the world. And there is thousands and thousands of individual decisions being made by other people that are going to impact your career and what your next, whether you win or lose. And it's a zero-sum game. And I ran for this office. I had, there was 8 people running. They were all very talented people. Not a single one was a kook. I mean, it was a really talented group of people. Every one of whom, any one of them would have been a perfectly decent, talented member of the state Senate. And what made the difference for me, ultimately, I think, was just all of these people who came out of the woodwork, both people who I knew before, but people who got activated by people who I knew before, people who got activated by me or things that I did, or other people who liked me, that just helped. And it became this kind of effort that ultimately got me across the finish line. So those were some things I would say. One thing about politics is, if you move someone a lot of people think of things as, well, is he for me or is he against me? Or is she for me or against me? But I've always thought of this stuff as a spectrum. Mm-hmm. If you move someone who wakes up every morning thinking about how to F you over, to just thinking, well, I still don't like him, I'm not going to vote for him, but I'm going to go work on other things, that is a major victory, right? A major victory. If you move someone from, neutrality to kind of tacit support, that's a victory. If you move someone from support to enthusiastic support, where they're showing up at your campaign office and throwing fundraisers for you, that's a major. Every one of these things is a victory. And I think sometimes we think of things in a binary way. Oh, he's for me or against me. Well, there were people who really liked my opponent for really good reasons. Mm-hmm. I had really good opponents. And if I could just get in front of them and let them see that I was a good guy too, mm-hmm. and that maybe they should focus their attention somewhere else, even as they were supporting my opponent, mm-hmm. that was a good thing too, right? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes people write off folks that aren't on their side. This is all about friend making and big tent. Mm-hmm. It's all about trying to build a big coalition when you get elected. And so that's my
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
For the day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We want to open the floor to questions. Anyone have a question for the senator today? We always have a good group. Yes.
You talked a lot about your successes within the legislature and your moments in your academic career that are also celebrated. Can you talk to this group about the moments where you learned hubris in your career and things that didn't work out that may have led you to the greater successes later down the road?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think you notice, right? Some of these successes I'm proud of actually came out of some successive defeats, right? I think so. Just resilience. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just got to put yourself out there, put the idea out there. You lose, but you kind of test the waters. You see where the arguments are. You see where people's positions are, and then you're able to craft a better solution the next time. I think as I went along, I mean, I certainly, there were some bills that I took on that I thought I could make a difference in that I just failed. The politics got too crazy, the optics got crazy, things got spun in a certain way that I lost control over. Mm-hmm. So there have been a couple of these examples. I sort of both, But even then, you learn from the experience, and I think as long as you continue to, I will say the most important thing throughout all this has been not being someone who people can trust and respect. Even when people disagreed with me, they knew that I was coming from a good place. Don't lie to people, because once you lie to people the first time, they're never going to trust you again, and that just really harms your ability to do your work. So, yeah, but I think one of the constant challenges in this job is how far do you reach? And sometimes you can overshoot, and there are consequences sometimes. Sometimes you get enemies, people who are mad at you because you jumped into something and you kind of touched a raw nerve with an interest group or an advocacy organization. Sometimes you have to push so hard, and you burn political capital because you're asking people to stand with you, and they don't really want to. And this job's all about knowing when to push your limits and when not to. And by the way, sometimes pushing actually builds more capital. I mean, I know last year I think you had Scott Wiener, and Scott pushes.
A couple years ago, yeah.
He pushes.
He does.
And he's decided that this is not and in some respects, he's lost a lot of tough votes, and he's been very disappointed, but he keeps pushing, and he's gotten a lot done too.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Any other questions out here? Yes. Microphone's on the way. Oh, right there and then next, yes.
If you could give yourself one piece of advice to the first-year law student version of yourself, besides taking negotiations, what would it be?
Definitely taking negotiations. Well, first of all, don't be too discouraged by the weird culture of law school. It is a strange place, and I know, there's some people get really caught up in the weirdness of law school, and I guess so. Remind yourself of what brought you to the table in the first place. Don't try not to get yourself caught in some of the logic of the place that doesn't really mesh with your own. It's not that there's not. By the way, one of my favorite moments in law school was when I was a 3L and I spoke to a group of pre-law students. And after I spoke, a bunch of them came up to me, and one of them said, thanks so much. I've always wanted to go to law school. Now I really want to go to law school. And then another one came up and said, thanks so much. I thought I wanted to go to law school, but now I really don't know. I don't think I'm going to. And I was so happy with that response because we all know this is not the right thing for everyone. And by the way, every single person in this room needs to get something different out of this experience. Some of you, it is absolutely the right thing to go the traditional law route and go work for a firm or go try to become a judge or clerk, go work for DOJ, whatever that is. It is absolutely the right thing for you to do, and you should do it. You should pursue it, and you should embrace it. And then for many of you, that traditional path is not the right path. But there's so many other paths to take with a law degree.
Yes.
And just keep yourself open to all those possibilities. So that's one thing I would say. So I guess that's what I would say, is that the culture can be a little overwhelming. But there's a big world out there, and there's a lot of need for smart people who've got the analytical skills that you get out of law school. The other thing is be careful with debt and money. It could really, I know I have a lot of friends that have had, some very close to me that have had some, really impacted their life, because they were not, they took on, they made financial decisions to finance law school and everything else. So just be careful. I'm not saying don't accrue debt. I think there's value to accruing debt for the right reasons, but make sure that you're not, just make sure don't, be aware. What kind of rates are you getting? Do you have a consolidation plan? Don't assume that the system is benign and looking out for you.
Absolutely. Right there, I think we had a question right here.
First off, thank you as a 1L for that advice. It's great to keep in mind going through this process. I'm a bit more curious on the work you did with the carbon neutral package here in California and looking at the renewable energies and how much we need to grow our efforts in that sector to be able to meet demands by 2045. I'm just a little curious what some of the talks were and some of the goals were for that process going forward to grow our efforts in those industries while still retaining, the industries that have also built California and a lot of the United States to what they are.
it's a massively, massively difficult undertaking that we're undertaking at this moment, where we know we need to transition from a fossil fuel-driven economy. The fossil fuels still drive most of our economy. We simply don't have the capacity to electrify everything that we know we need to electrify, at least right now. So we know we have so much growth in that area. There are also all sorts of other alternative energies that have ups and downs. Electricity, by the way, is not perfect either. I mean, most electricity you have right now, it's nighttime, right? So most of this is actually probably coming from a non-renewable source. It's peak time. So we've got great amount of solar being produced on sunny days in the summer at 12 noon, and no solar being produced at night, and limited other forms of renewables. So even if you electrify everything and you don't create a across-the-board system for procurement that's greener, you're not making the kind of progress you want to make. And then you talk about just the job issues. I mean, transition for all of these folks. We talk about folks in labor who have negotiated really strong collective bargaining agreements for their workers in these traditional fossil fuel sector industries, and how skeptical, quite frankly, they are of a just transition and what a green economy might look like to them. And I think a lot of them say that their folks don't have the luxury to worry about warming in 2100, and so there's a lot of those kinds of challenges involved as well. So the issue here is how do we make this transition economically viable? How do we make it real? How do we also do it in a way that's not just important for our own politics, but it's important because the only reason to do this is to get the rest of the world to do it and to help to scale the technologies that are going to help us reach these goals in a way that will provide a blueprint for other economies to adopt the same energy transition that we do. Because in the end of the day, we could decarbonize every grain of sand in California, and it won't change climate change if nobody else adopts. If nobody else gets on the bandwagon. So it's one of the reasons. It's one of the many reasons why we can never ignore these questions of economics, of pricing, of logistics, of scale, of jobs, of economic and social justice. And these were all of the things we were grappling with. And we've basically set ambitious new targets. I'm proud of those targets, but it's going to be the fight of our lives to reach these targets. And it really is. I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, because we know how existential climate change is likely to be for you and for your children and for my children. And I also know that we knew we couldn't ignore the issue. And I'm just glad that the governor finally, he really took it on at the end. And we had a lot of work that we've been doing in advance, but he really sort of saw what an opportunity there was for him to take advantage of the work that had happened in the legislature, to start to spend some political capital to get this over the finish line. And I really credit him for his work. But look, thinking about the future, as you're thinking about jobs, I mean, we're going to need our best and brightest thinking about all of these aspects, including on the law side, as we continue to decarbonize, but also really build out and scale all the new greener energy technologies that are going to get us there. And look, we don't have the capacity now. We also, who would have thought we would have had the computing power there's more computing power in one of these things than was in the entire ship that brought the first man to the moon, right? So we have a lot of, we could, if we keep working at it, I actually have a lot of confidence that we can make a lot of progress on these big problems. But we have to start working, and we have to continue the work, and these goals have provided the oomph, the emphasis, the incentive for a great deal more investment from the energy sector, from the venture capital sector, from industry, and from governments to that are ultimately going to be necessary for us to scale up these green technologies of the future, the green energies of the future.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Dean Moylan? Oh,
Two.
maybe
We'll
a
do
couple
two.
more.
We'll do
Yeah,
two,
let's
yeah.
take a couple
All
more.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I'll
2 or 3.
Mine's a follow-up to that one.
Yeah.
So with Proposition 30 having gone down, what's the plan? How are we going to have the infrastructure for the electric vehicles? You mentioned the smog in LA and the difference that it makes to have cars that are not polluting on the roads. So how do we do it without the money for the infrastructure?
Yep. Do you want to take the 3 questions and then I'll just answer them all? Is that?
Sure.
Is that-
If
should we
you
do
can
that?
keep track of all of those,
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
do
I'm
it.
gonna
Yes.
take notes. Okay.
First and foremost, thank you, Senator, for speaking tonight. I think like something I want to talk about and just ask you about, and I feel like it's been a recurring theme with this whole conversation, and it's kind of just in action and like government action and what that can do to different industries. You mentioned how when government fails to act, it can actually hurt players that actually want to do the right thing and make a difference. And I think that's something that a lot of constituents and just people are frustrated with. They want their government to do the right thing. They want their government to act. And in fact, the recycling bill you mentioned, it was partially part of the push and the pressure came from the threat of having it on the proposition.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I was initially going to ask you, how long do you think, and that was more of a theoretical question, how much longer do you think it was going to take for something like that to pass without the push of proposition? But I think what might be more useful is just asking you, how can we possibly maybe reform government or just push government to be more active to like you were saying, just to continue the good fight and continue making the changes that are necessary?
Yeah, great question. Great question. Okay. And is there a
We have
third
one more?
question? Over here?
Erica.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. My question was, I'm somebody that wants to go into the public sector, and something I hear very commonly is the frustration or sometimes feeling defeated in that line of work. And my question to you is, have you ever felt that? And if you have, what has gotten you out of that funk or out of that feeling?
Okay, great questions, all 3. Gosh, Prop 30 infrastructure, I mean, all I will say on that is that the governor really got involved. And a lot of reason why Prop 30 lost was because the governor came out pretty hard against it. And he did make a bunch of commitments associated with his opposition. He kept saying, well, we do need to fund this. It's absolutely, we need to fund the infrastructure for the transition, but this isn't the right way to do it. Well, okay, Governor, this is your opportunity to kind of put your money where your mouth is. The governor has by far the most power over the state budget of any individual in the state. And he certainly did put up a lot of money in last year's budget, no question. It got scaled back a little bit given the economic realities of this year, but there's, most of that money is still intact. We've got a lot of federal money coming down the pike through the IRA. It's such a weird thing to call it the Inflation Reduction because it's a kind of an Orwellian name. I support the bill, by the way, very much, but not because of inflation reduction. Anyhow, but I think ultimately it's about holding him accountable, right? I mean, he cares a lot about Democratic base. You see that reflected in a lot of things he's doing. You see that reflected in the fight over oil prices, for example, and going after the oil industry. He took a very public and I think really decisive and ultimately, impactful stance on Prop 30. And I understand, his arguments about, I guess I alluded to some of them earlier in my talk, wanting to keep California competitive for high-income people. That's really genuinely important because we do rely on those folks a lot for our revenues. That's all true. But we also now need him to step up so, as I say, there's a lot of money in the budget. There will be more, but this is something we're gonna have to continually push on, especially within Democratic Party circles, I would say. Gosh, your great question about inaction and power and reforming government. Sorry, well, you actually, I'm sorry, you were asking about inaction in reforming government. I wrote down power, and I circled it. So, I mean, from my perspective, I really do think a lot of, it's really important, and this kind of gets to your question too. I really think it's important for people who are interested in the law, certainly in government and politics, but in the law in general, to really learn about power and the exercise of power and lack of power and how all sorts of people from lots of different backgrounds have exercised power. And, I see the folks who are able to make change, understand the tools that they have at their disposal. So in the case of the plastics bill, we didn't have lobbying power. It was a David and Goliath battle because it was the cities and the environmental community, neither of whom have a lot of juice from a lobbying perspective in the Capitol, up against just a whack-a-mole set of industry groups that just kept popping up opposing our bill. What do we do? Well, we realized this was actually something that was really popular. Our position was really popular with the general public. And so okay, the legislature won't move, we're going to the ballot. And yeah, we knew that they could beat us, but as I said, it would have cost them so much money. They knew we would have kept coming back. We would have come back with another bill. So they saw that we were resilient, that we weren't going away, that we're committed to this issue, and that it was a popular issue. They polled it, and they saw how popular it was. And so that was the power tool we had. Different people use different power tools, right? The labor movement's a perfect example of how working class people who are traditionally disempowered have come together to exert power and have actually accrued a lot of power here in the state of California. So I guess, my constant frustration, I suppose, in this work is that for the most part, power over there in that building is really exercised by special interests who organize to influence the process. And it was frustrating being with these UC deans today because it got me thinking about, well, here's this kind of, today I met with UC deans and I met with a bunch of high school kids who were sending me photographs. They were living in a wealthy part of LA, and there was pictures that they were showing me of the ceilings falling out of the walls, and it was a decrepit mess, their high school, because they come from an area that's a little more conservative, and so the people haven't been willing to vote for bonds, and there's just not enough funding for school facilities. And so here are these people, these are people kind of suffering, because we don't have enough resources. And yet I think about some of the other things that get money because of people who've organized to exert power. And so I guess what I would say is learn about the way the system works as best you can, and then engage, put your talents and your training that you're getting here and your skills to work, trying to make it better. And kind of building, upon that question onto your question, what I find motivating when I may feel defeated is that that when you, first of all, when you do have these wins, it's so exciting to have been able to personally have affected, and made change in a way that is going to benefit your society and your state and your community. But it's also, you've done your part in making the world a little better. You've taken the background, the skills, and all the training you've had, and you've actually made things better. And that's really exciting. I mean, to have that opportunity. And I guess all of us are try to, I guess if you care about this stuff, try to find ways to be influential. Try to find ways to make a difference. It could be through running for office, certainly. It could be through working on a staff or joining an advocacy group that works in an area that you really care about. I mean, if you want to work on reforming government, there's wonderful organizations, Common Cause, the League of Women Voters, California Clean Money Campaign. Common Cause, for example, is a fantastic organization that works on just, all they do is think about how to make government cleaner and better and actually more responsive to real people. There's a lot of different groups out there like this that actually do hire people and do their jobs that you could do in this line of work. If you know, and there's really the people. My friends who are working in this area are really living fulfilled lives, and are enjoying it. So I would just encourage you all to really think broadly about your options. If you care about these issues, lean into them and try to get involved. Let me put it this way, it can only be more disappointing if you get to the end of your life and you've sort of avoided all the things you cared about just to make a little bit of money or because you felt it was too overwhelming. That may bring you peace in some respects, but probably I would hope a little bit of disquiet, a little bit of disquiet in other respects, because we only are here on this planet once, and you've all been blessed. I mean, we are incredibly blessed people in the grand scheme of things. We have so many peers who were left behind. We all know these people who we went to, public high school with or wherever else. And we're all blessed with this special educational opportunity, this special training. And I just would hope that many of you would find a way to put it to good use. And by the way, if you do end up in the private sector, do pro bono work, get on boards, give money and support institutions and organizations and candidates and causes that you care about. Find ways to, and by the way, don't be afraid of flipping back and forth. There's lots of really talented people that have spent time in the private sector and the public sector. I spent time in the private sector too. You look at members of the cabinet who've gone back and forth. So that's another thing to think about too. But you got one life to live, and there's just, it's an exciting world. There's tons of problems, and we need you to help us solve them. So really appreciate your time and attention, and
Absolutely.
Looking forward to the Sate.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Senator Allen, for being here with us this evening.
Thank you.
And we will transition to the reception. So everybody help yourself, please. And we've got photographers.